Let me tell you a story. After a long journey, I found myself walking up to the entrance of a dark cave. As I stood in the mouth of the cave, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was the cave where I began my journey, and now I was returning, I was eager to reconnect with the others I'd left behind. As I made my way deeper into the cave, step by step, I could hear the familiar sounds of a fire crackling and a quiet murmuring coming from the deepest part of the cave. Eventually, I saw my old friends, but they looked different to me now. They hadn't changed, but I was seeing things about them that I hadn't noticed before. As I walked up to them, they all suddenly glared at me with suspicion. "What do you want?" one of them growled. "I've just come to tell you about my journey," I said and smiled to ease the tension. "It's been a long time since I was here. I wanted to tell you about what's been happening outside the cave." The group exchanged wary glances before one of them spoke up. "We don't care about what's outside the cave," he said. "We're happy here." "But there's so much more out there," I said, pointing towards the mouth of the cave. "There's light and colour and beauty. You don't have to be stuck here in the darkness." But the group just looked at me like I was crazy. "Here's just fine, thanks. We're safe, and we already have everything we need." I tried to explain. "You don't realise what you're missing. You have to come and see. It's overwhelming at first, but once you spend some time out there, you'll understand." I was as convincing as I could be, but I couldn't fully describe it in a way they would understand because they had never left the cave. No matter what I said, they refused to listen. Eventually, they became angry and defensive, and before I knew it, they were attacking me. "Leave us alone," they shouted. "We don't care. Go away." One of them pushed me back, and I stumbled as I tried to defend myself. It was no use. Frustrated and disappointed, I left the cave with my head hanging low. I don't think it's difficult to argue that the world we live in is not the real world. If you're consuming this content on a website, if you're surrounded by machines and right angles, if you buy food from a supermarket, then you don't live in the real world. You live in a world that has been constructed, for better and for worse, by other human beings. And as modern life continues to develop, we find ourselves surrounded and protected by technology, products, and media that buffer our experience of reality. Our perception is mediated by the features of a global civilization that runs at an industrial scale and is so complex and distributed as to be almost entirely opaque. But hidden behind all of this, the real world still exists. And what's difficult is being motivated enough to actually push apart all of these opaque layers to see through and experience it. If you haven't yet properly taken the time to register the existence of the real world, it might be a good idea to stop for a second and just give it some thought. Now, you might come to the conclusion that this cushioned, caged world we live in today is a product of oppressive systems or deceivers that push self-serving ideologies. That might lead you into a state of feeling powerless and alienated and abused. These types of conclusions can be dangerous. So I'm not going to spend time convincing you that you've been trapped, because you've not been trapped. Instead, I'm going to make the case for a new way of being that keeps you in contact with the real world as you enjoy the benefits of technology, media, industry, protection, and all the things that have been built in good faith by other human beings just like you. I want to invite you to spend some time away from the place where it's safe and familiar and move out to where it might be a bit overwhelming and a long journey away from where you're comfortable, but it's worth it. Reality is less like a series of objects and more like a series of processes, each with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every one of these processes works within larger processes that are shaped in a similar way. You might have heard this interesting fact before. Every 5 to 10 years, the human body changes over its material, so the atoms that make you now aren't all the same atoms that made you when you were a child. But you still exist from then to now as a continuous process that gathers, arranges, and exports material according to a specific plan that's encoded in your DNA. This process that has your name, otherwise known as you, can either work well or badly inside the processes that surround it. So the real world is a complex web of these interconnected processes that sit inside each other and exchange material to create the world that we see. Instead of merely understanding the objects as they present themselves, an understanding of the processes will give us a greater understanding of the real world. Reality is dynamic and constantly changing, but it is also composed of structures that remain the same. The laws of physics, for example, remain constant throughout all the many reactions between the material of the universe. But we're not just physical beings. There are hidden parts of our lives that sit above, below, and behind what we can measure with instruments. We have thoughts, goals, identities, different emotions, different personalities, and these interact just as much as our material bodies. To stay alive, we depend on the idea that there is something to live for. There's meaning, there's hope, there's direction. This is the only reality you can reasonably accept if you plan on staying alive. Every day, we rely on the fact that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to what we do. And the real world expresses this by showing up as a process. A process that is deep and full of light and color and beauty because it governs the lives of real people like you and me. By joining in with this process, as it has been shown to us by many people before us, we can come together in a way that is healthy because we're working well with each other, within ourselves, and with reality. So what does this mean practically? It means doing things that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The problem with that is that it's hard to do these things. And because it's hard, our modern lives are overrun by technologies that remove the burden of striving, so we don't have to suffer the hard things. If you want a result, there's often a button somewhere you can press, and in a few moments it's there. But this is not how things work in the real world. The real world is like growing a plant. You dig the soil, you plant the seed, you water it and keep the weeds and pests away. But while you're putting all of that effort in, you're always working with forces that are outside of your control. You can't convince the seed to germinate or dictate when the sun will shine. And you can't make the plant grow from seedling to sapling to shrub in an instant. You have to wait for it to become what it will become. But that doesn't mean you do nothing. In the real world, your plant won't grow how you want it to grow unless you do the work, even though that's hard. Have you ever tried to raise a child? When dealing with a real infant human being, you might have all kinds of ideas about how you want things to be, but you will quickly be confronted with the need for acceptance, resourcefulness, tolerance, bravery, grace. The list goes on. It's a slow, steady process with incremental changes as the child grows. And you learn along the way, changing even your expectations and aspirations as you go. Similarly, when getting your body into great shape, you have to go through the process to get your body fit for life. You could be the wealthiest person on earth, but you can't just pay your body to be healthy. So these are all examples of ways we can actually start to get back in touch with reality, and through that process, learn the virtues that help us navigate the world as it really is and build a life that has meaning, hope, and direction. Instead of waiting for a machine or establishment that was built by someone else to immediately serve everything to us ready-made, we can build things together with nearby materials, a bit of teamwork, and some honest effort. The real world is a mysterious and difficult place. It can be heartbreaking when you find that things don't always happen exactly as you desired with immediate effect. But we can choose to accept and embrace the real world by simply working towards something better and allowing that process to reveal what the world is really like. This understanding of the real world is one of the 6 core ideas that drives what I do at Gymnasion.net. This is the first part of a series expanding on each of the 6 core ideas. The next part of this series is titled Green Face Meals. With this idea, I will explore the real world in a bit more depth by talking about the food we eat.